Welcome, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. I want to start by letting you know of a retreat opportunity my wife and I will be facilitating in the near future. Having an intentional plan can make all the difference in your life and relationships, and we want to provide you with space and support to make that plan become a reality at our real-life retreat, May 14 to 16, at beautiful Lake Tahoe. This will be a time to step back, rest, renew, and reset 2021. This is a faith-based retreat designed for couples and individuals. As your hosts and facilitators, my wife and I will guide you through a process of discovery and growth, allowing you the time and giving you the support needed to move forward with confidence and greater intention. This could be a great weekend away for anyone navigating a season of transition, looking for a weekend of Sabbath rest, or simply wanting to live with greater intentionality in life and relationships moving forward. So I invite you to check that out. Check out the retreat page on my website, encompasslifecoaching.com, to learn more, and we would love to see you there. Here in this podcast, we talk a lot about navigating transition, and while I love to discuss all things transition related, I also love talking about relationships and marriage. And navigating change in a marriage relationship has its own unique set of challenges, for sure. And that's why I was thrilled when pastor and therapist Austin Pritchard accepted my invitation to be my guest on Navigate. Austin is a pastor and marriage and family therapist in South Central Pennsylvania. He has a passion for helping people reach their fullest potential and achieve their dreams. Austin spent 12 years in active duty in the U.S. Air Force, where he focused on leading teams, providing support to deployed team members, and overseeing tactical training. Austin received his associate's degree in electronics from the University of the Air Force in 2008. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Interdisciplinary Studies from Liberty University in 2016 and a Master of Arts in Marriage and Family Therapy from Liberty University in the spring of 2019. Being a husband and father is one of Austin's greatest joys, and Austin and his wife Teresa have two daughters, Aurora and Damaris. Again, thanks for listening as I have a conversation with pastor and marriage family therapist Austin Pritchard about his personal story of transition, what he's learned, and what he wants to pass on to us about marriage and relationships. All right, Austin Pritchard, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation on Navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Tim. Love the podcast.
Well, thank you. And we love yours as well. And so I get a shot at you today. You got a shot at my wife and I couple weeks ago and for your podcast. And so it's great to be able to collaborate like this.
Awesome. Yeah, I love being able to partner with what you guys are doing and seeing everything and just, share with people.
You are both a pastor and a therapist. And so this is kind of the backdrop here in terms of maybe some of the things we're going to talk about today. Tell us, what do you do as a pastor that you absolutely love?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love as a pastor, and even my role that I've done over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, has been just the teaching and discipleship with believers, with other Christians, and coming alongside them in their walk and helping them grow with their faith. I think most of what I do, those light bulb moments that people have, I love being a part of that on someone's walk, and even in the church. Anywhere, it's just so cool seeing something click, or you're walking alongside someone and then you just see their faith come alive inside of them, or their life begin to change because of what God's doing in them through you, essentially.
Yeah, I love that. Probably kind of reveals some of the ways you're wired, I'm assuming, in terms of connecting with people. Would you be consider yourself kind of a one-on-one person, or you like to speak to groups, crowds? How do you, or kind of a little bit of both?
I'm kind of like a little bit of both. When I did my Myers-Briggs years ago, and I was like 51, 49 E and I.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
like right in
So
the middle. Like
introvert,
I'm,
extrovert, good
yeah,
balance.
it just
Yeah.
depends on the day and my emotional state on where I'm going to land.
Yeah. Well, what about your work as a therapist? What do you do as a
Mhm.
therapist that you just gets you up in the morning? You just love doing it.
Yeah, it's been interesting because being fairly new at it, I've been working within the counseling field for about 4 years, and with graduating now going on 2 years postgraduate, I've been working with people, and still those light bulb moments. Like the best feeling is when you have the conversation with a client and they no longer need
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
so satisfying. But I think working with couples has been one of the most rewarding things. I chose when I was doing my bachelor's. It took me about 15 years to do my bachelor's degree. So there's hope for anyone out there still
Hmm.
struggling with it. It was one of those stories, heartbroken kid drops out junior year. And then I joined the
Wow.
Air Force and,
Okay.
plunk around through there and do, they really encourage personal development as you progress through your career. So I
Right.
got my associates, and it was in electronics because that was in my career field. And then I fiddled around with my bachelor's from communication to cybersecurity. And then I wound up just finishing with an interdisciplinary degree in computational engineering
Mm.
and business. So it's a dual focused bachelor's. And because of my background with electronics and maintenance and the things I was doing in the Air Force, I had all this technical training that they put in towards that. So I have this computational engineering degree in my understudy, and then I'm like, well, I'm gonna do a hard pivot and do
That
my
sounds like a hard
master's.
pivot.
Yeah, a little bit. And I did my master's in marriage and family therapy. And this is post, I mean, I went through a pretty bad breakup and divorce in 2013 was when it finalized. And
Hmm.
then out of that hurt, a lot of times I find that God gives us a purpose, right? And Romans
Right.
8 talks about using everything for good, right? It
Mm.
wasn't a good situation. It was a completely broken approach to relationships, but God used that to plant something in me. So I was like, what can I do? What would be the best use of this resource that I have through the military to pay for my degree? Like, I was
Mm.
blessed because of being in the Air Force. I got to go and pursue my master's without having to pay a ton or take out a bunch of student loans because of my post 9/11 GI Bill. And so I was praying about it. And I really felt, a counseling degree would be super helpful because we interact as pastors with people a lot, and also have a need for that. And I
Hmm.
was like, okay, well, that's good. Do I just want to do like a general, licensed professional counseling track? Or then I was like, I really feel so many of our issues come down to relationship breakdowns.
Mm.
And having this background of hurt in my own life is a reality that I was like, okay, what what did I need and what could I learn? And
Yeah.
just having a heart to see not prevent, but help other people navigate that season and maybe not have the experience I did, right? Can I help someone else not have a divorce or not have a breakdown in
Mm.
their relationship? And so many of our problems, I really believe, come down to these breakdowns in relationships. Even in individual counseling,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of the work comes down to a um, misunderstanding or approach or a hurt in a relationship. And then how do we recover from that? How do we rebound from those damages?
Good. Yeah, I love what you said about you. You love it's there's some connection between doing what you do as a pastor and what you do as a therapist, in the sense
Hmm.
that you love those light bulb moments, those
Yeah.
aha moments, those moments when people are getting it. My wife calls, when they no longer need you.
Hmm.
Yeah, my wife comes home sometimes and says, I graduated another couple, or
Oh, I
she uses
love
the word
that.
graduate. I love
I
that.
love
Yeah,
that.
they no longer need me. They're on to bigger and better things, and they've got some tools and resources they're going to take with them, to move ahead. And yeah, I love that as well, seeing that even in what I do as a coach, still kind of on this area of your call as a pastor and your call as a therapist and or your vocation and what you're doing there. What are the challenges of taking on both of those roles as a pastor? And I believe you're a marriage family therapist, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges around that?
Sure. Oh, goodness. I think a lot is people hear what you do and they have a need, and then balancing some of the relationships. I think, being a pastor, there's this very intimate relationship you have with people, and you're connected with them. You're very involved in their life, right? You're doing life
Right.
together. You're participating in their family and their relationships. You're helping and connecting with their kids. You're seeing them regularly and doing, get-togethers and birthdays and celebrations and dinners and all these things. And then therapy in that sphere is very different as far as how you connect with someone. There's that professional relationship and these ethical boundaries that you hold where I don't counsel family or friends. I don't, interact with, I actually don't see anyone as a client from my home church. And I that's just, there's some weird kind of boundaries that come into play there as far as that goes, so that you can keep healthy relationships and stay connected to people.
Right.
As a pastor, you're very, it's kind of a different dynamic, right? Because pastoring, people are coming to you for your opinion or for what, God's word says. And then in therapy, it's much more in that coaching, mentoring type thing where you're helping people move through their struggles, but you're not necessarily imposing your own belief system or worldview on top of that. I think there is some reality that I can't remove myself completely. That's just doesn't happen. But at the same time, you're aware of that. You're not like, if someone disagrees with you, I'm still able to see them as a therapist, because that's the reality of life, that freedom that we all have to choose our interaction. So as a therapist, I can actually model a little bit of Christ in my own life and my own approach, right? And they see me regularly, but without having that sense of not judgment, but them feeling that I'm critical towards them and helping them succeed at life and the life they want to live. And so I think that is super interesting. And I know it's challenging, but I think, we're called to live our life. Was it Timothy, where we're called to live a quiet and humble life, and through that it becomes a witness to others around us. I think some of that, and in Galatians, we're called to be gentle and kind towards people, and those interactions are actually some of our greatest witnesses as believers to other people.
Good. Yeah, that's so true. But it is a balancing act, isn't it? And some of that's imposed on you because of the ethics and the boundaries that are kind of written into the whole process, of being a therapist, being a counselor, a professional licensed counselor. So it's a balancing act. And we've seen that as well. As I also, similar to you, was pastoring and doing my full-time coaching work, which had some of the similar areas of needing to balance this, have some boundaries here, So, yeah. Well,
I'm not making it feel too bad. You don't want to hurt someone's feelings and be like, no, I'm not going to counsel you because I don't want to. It's more like, I would rather keep our relationship where it's at. I would rather be able to be involved in your life. I don't want to give up the relationship that I have currently with you and that ability to do that.
That's good.
Because we're in a small rural context where me and my wife live, and there is the reality that the main areas, there's only 8,000 people within the town, and then the surrounding areas, under 100,000 people within the normal commute range that would come to our church. So it's a small area. So there are people that I've seen that have come through our church doors, right? And that is a hard relationship, right? There's a weird kind of distance between me and those people,
Yeah.
not for any other reason than because of the therapy relationship. Is this context where, confidentiality, what you say inside that room stays between you and the therapist, unless, you're a threat to yourself, someone else, there's abuse of a minor or like a court order, those type things where we're mandated reporters, which I guess is true for pastors also as mandated reporters, but there's this different kind of understanding where I can be open and honest with my therapist, and then outside of that therapy room, I don't have to see them.
Yeah. And but it does, as you kind of navigate those boundaries and keep them in check, it goes a long way to speak of just trust, building trust into that relationship. They can trust you. Mm-hmm. And whether that's inside the sanctuary, so to speak, or outside of that in your therapy. Yeah, that's good. You are also a PK, pastor's kid. So let's talk a little bit about that. How were your growing up years as a pastor's kid instrumental in forming your interests and the path that you've chosen, including your vocational choices?
Yeah. Sometimes they weren't always probably positive. I think there's the stereotypical kind of responses, right? You have two kind of preachers' kids and MKs, missionary kids, right? You have the ones that are just 100% on board and just follow after God their whole life and never kind of step outside of that and kind of test the waters. And then there's the other side where it's like the rebellious kind of black sheep story of a pastor's kid, and they go off the reservation. I was probably somewhere in the middle. It was about 10 years where my faith was not an active part of my life, right? I wouldn't call myself someone who was a Christian or projected a Christ-like lifestyle. And so there was a returning back to God later in my life. My current life, I'm not super old, but like there was this, because it was around 30 where I actually came back to God. And, for about 12 years, 18 or 20 to 30 was really that season where I walked away from my faith and I went out and tried to do my own thing and figure life out outside of the context of my upbringing, my parents' faith. So often we have to find and prove our own faith. I remember, growing up and even through my 20s, my dad would always say, we taught you guys everything. The word of God, you've experienced God's presence and God's power. But at some point we have to go from a head knowledge knowing to a heart accepting. There's that difference between knowing something's true and living it out or believing it like as a deep conviction.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and that can be quite the journey for some pastor kids, missionary kids, and how they come to we might say owning their own faith and their own relationship with God, rather than seeing it something that's passed down to them. We don't pass down faith. We can pass down legacy and teaching and modeling and example, but the faith has to be personal. And so it became personal for you. Did you say kind of in your 30s then?
Yeah, really right after my divorce with my first wife, that really was a pivotal turn. I had to decide, and it wasn't like an overnight turn. It was this progression that I went through in returning back to, the faith of my fathers, and then accepting it as my own, right?
Yeah.
Not just being my dad's faith, my parents' faith, my family's faith, but bringing it in as my personal faith. And then figuring out what that meant, those changes that God had to do in me through that. So yeah, absolutely. It was that turn through that. And God uses those transitions in our life so frequently.
Yeah.
I don't know that you had asked a little bit about vocational choices and work. And I think the negative side of it is that I worked so hard not to be like my dad or follow in his first steps or just do be a pastor because everyone thought I should because my dad was. And my parents never put in that pressure on me. They were very open, accepting to whatever career choices we as their kids pursued. But ultimately, when you follow after what God places in your heart and these passions and interests, like I've always been very compassionate and empathetic, and like to not be that is a almost intentional choice where I have to push that side of me outside or down and take a more obstinate approach towards people in relationships. And so I did that for a while, and I outside of where I am right now, I was never able to find contentment. It was like I almost had to always be doing something new, which was pretty easy in the Air Force because they move you around a lot. Like the longest I was ever somewhere was 6 years. And even there, I moved around within that context during those 6 years. So I never really did any one thing for more than 3 years. And in about that 3-year point, I would get itchy, it would get old, it would get unfulfilling. And I'd have to look outside of whatever I was doing for something new to try and bring some kind of satisfaction into my own life. So there's this huge contentment missing that I've been able to find, in Christ and in my life in this season.
Good. Yeah. I love that. Well, you mentioned transition. Tell me about a transition. So you mentioned one transition, a pivotal point, and in terms of your first marriage and the coming to faith, coming back to the Lord. But maybe more recently, tell me about one transition that's been especially hard on your marriage, and how are you getting through that?
Sure. I think, we're constantly going through transitions. One of the ones when I was reviewing this question and thinking about it over the last day or two was when I actually separated from the Air Force. Was a pretty difficult transition. It's fairly recent in terms because it was, I think, 2016 or 17. Let's see. I was in 12 years, joined in 2004. So it was 2016 where I separated from the Air Force. So we haven't quite hit 5 years from being out of the military yet for me. And that was, a stable job. One of the, not many people understood my separating from the Air Force. There were a few, especially within the military, because that community you go in, and if you make it past 10 years, that's usually the bubble, right? If you hit 10 years, everyone's like, 10 more, you get a guaranteed pension, right? And guaranteed health insurance, all these payoffs and benefits for, giving 10 or 20 years of your life to service, right? So it's very earned, very deserved. But most people, when they see that, they'll stay even if they're not satisfied. They'll just gut it out for 10 years or the last 5 years. And there are so many of my friends and colleagues that in the military and that have retired that love the life and were satisfied through it. But for me, where God had me, I'd moved up to the area we're in. I had met my current wife and we were dating, and then we got married, and her whole family was from this area. She didn't have the background in the military. And so at that end of my last assignment, and my enlistment was up, so I had extended to take this assignment, and it brought me to the 12-year point. And with that, I had to decide if I was going to take the next job offer they gave me and re-enlist for another 3 to 4 years, which would have put me, 15 to 16 years. And at that point, if I had taken that next assignment, I would have just stayed the 20 and retired. So I had this, pivotal thing, and I just wasn't satisfied. I didn't have the drive to pursue progression within that career anymore. And like, I love the military and what they are, and I don't really speak bad of it. I think it was a great time of my life and very influential in how I think and approach life, and, very developing discipline and routine in myself. So, benefited from it greatly, but I just I wasn't willing to give 8 more years to something when I knew that there was a transition coming. And so me and my wife prayed for it. And with, marriage, there's this balance of it's not what one person wants. There's two people involved in this relationship. And so my wife's from Pennsylvania. I'm from California. Well, I hadn't lived in California since 2004 when I left. And so I've had these, 12 plus years of being away from my family. She's not used to that. And then I get a job offer from Pennsylvania to go to Texas. And so, I always like to joke that it would have been fair because it's right in the middle from both grandparents.
Yeah, right.
Right. So there's equal. It's
Equal.
That is fair, which that's just more proof that no one actually wants fair, because that would have been fair for us to be in the middle and they would have had the equal distance. But so we decided that we were going to stay in this area, and God had provided this opportunity. We had been working at a church, and I'd been volunteering at the current church we're serving at. And through that, we were able to make a transition. And this was a big faith transition because I was separating from 12 years in the Air Force, steady and decent salary coming in every month, to take a step of faith and go on staff as a pastor with the church as their discipleship pastor with no guarantee of income. Like, they actually were like, we don't have the money to pay you right now, but we believe that God will provide it. But we don't know when that'll be. And so like, me and my wife had to really pray about it. And we actually went 2.5, maybe 3 months without any pay from them, and just on faith and, our savings that we had and some different investments that we moved and cashed out to be able to do that. And I remember after about 3 months and we were out of money, sitting at the kitchen table and praying one morning going, God, you got to show up. Yeah. I believe this was you. Unless I missed it, I got to know if this is you. I need some kind of sign or proof that we're in, your will for us. And literally there was a stack of mail on the table, and I hadn't opened it yet from the day prior. And I sat down and opened it, and there was a letter from my credit card. And, those are never good letters to open, especially when you don't have any money. And I opened it, and it was actually a check from the credit card company for what would have equaled a a little bit more than a full month's salary from when I was in the military.
Wow.
And I'd had this credit card, and they had this thing called this Soldiers and Sailors Act, and basically it caps your interest rate on your credit cards while you're in the military at a certain percentage. And so they hadn't done that. They had charged me a higher interest rate over these years, identified it, and then sent me that interest that they charged. And but for it to be that timing, right? And for them to acknowledge that mistake and send it to me, I took as, okay, God, here we are. And that really propelled us into a season where we were both, getting paid, and the church was able to bring us on. And, it wasn't this outlandish amount. It was still, very tight, and we didn't have, a lot of the extras. We first got married. We were in a 27-foot travel trailer in, Pennsylvania. And when I first moved up here, we'd get, 3 feet of snow and, figuring that out. Or our second place was a 800 square foot 1-bedroom apartment that we were in for 2 years. And so there's this reality of, yes, God provided, but it still wasn't easy. And then navigating that even through this season, it's been, a lot of faith involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So it was the transition was especially hard in terms of trusting God for provision, for number one, is what I'm hearing you saying.
It feels like it, but I think looking back, it probably wasn't. I think one of the big things that was hard was a difference in mindsets that me and my wife had. I was very work driven, and she's very familial. And so, and I think, difference in how we share and receive love. She's very much a time spent type of person, and I'm kind of more acts of service. And so I'm like, I'm going out, I'm doing all these things because I care about our family, or working. And the Air Force and the military in general, that's like a duty first type of environment, right? They call and then you have to go and answer. You don't get a choice on whether you go into work or not. And where they go or what you do is all pretty much predetermined, and you signed your name on the line. So you just agreed to do it, and there wasn't any other options. And so even coming out of that, for us learning how to balance, our own expectations, our own desires, and assumptions about relationships and like how we interact and what we expect out of each other, the time that we spend together, prioritizing the time at work and time at home.
Yeah. And you were
stuff.
fairly newly married then during this transition.
Yeah, we were, first, I think just after our first year of marriage, it would have got out. And
yeah, that's tough.
Our 1 year anniversary was May, and then I would have separated in August. So we would have been like, 14 or 15 months married at that point.
Okay. Yeah. And as you talk about transition, as we talk about like these big pivotal seasons where we make a big decision, a choice to shift in some area of our life, then it opens up this whole area of all these other decisions around that need to be made. So decision making in marriage can be crazy hard because there's so many parties involved and multiple agendas, right? It's not just you and your wife even. So, I mean, obviously we have to give priority to that relationship, but there's like you were saying, you have family on one side of, the U.S. and a family kind of on the other side of the U.S. There's other people, expectations around that. What advice would you give to couples starting out in terms of making decisions? Just navigating all those decisions, staying on the same page.
Working together, I think, is so important. A lot of times I'll work with couples and we'll have these conversations about moving from me and you to we and us, right? In our approach, a lot of times it's like my opinion versus your opinion, right? And the beginning of relationships, it's very much like I have the way I do things, you have the way you do things, right? Me and my wife fold towels differently. Like, and that can be like an issue even just on simple as that, because I think they should be this way, or she thinks they should be that way, right? But I mean, it's a small thing, but if we don't come to a agreement on that, how we're going to handle the big things. And I think, scripture tells us that twice, that, once in Genesis and once in the New Testament, and maybe more, that, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and they become one. And that's the way God intended it. And so there's this, awareness of our family. And I mentioned, that desire to be close to my family, or choosing to be next to her family and not leaving this area. But those decisions actually weren't influenced by our parents. Those were internal things that me and her were feeling, that me and Teresa were feeling in our own relationship. Like, I have a deep desire to be close to my parents. That's something that I wrestle with because I'm not close to them. And I know what that feels like for me. And so as a husband, I don't want to put my wife in that situation or even do that ask. Now, we have had the conversation. If God told us or called us to go somewhere, we would go, right? If God had called us and with an opportunity to go to Texas or wherever, we would be the first ones to go, but it would be because God led us there. And so with making decisions for our family and what we do, and how the choices we make, it's very much coming together. Am I willing to work, with my wife? It's this compromise where we're not bringing in my opinion and your opinion and then who's right, as much as what is our opinion. How do we want to do this together? This is how I was brought up, and this is how you were brought up. What works for us? And it could be the way my wife's family did something, because there's things there that I love that I never experienced until I became a part of that family. Or it could be something the way my family has done something that she never experienced, and we want to add that into our family unit. And then it might be none of those, and we have to figure out a new approach to a situation, right? like how me and Teresa parent is a constant conversation, and it doesn't necessarily involve the way our parents do it or what they think we should be doing, as much as we have to decide, and through prayer and, careful consideration, what's best for our family and our kids' needs. And then that's the way we do it as a couple. I think that is so important. It's hard to do at the beginning, but I think the earlier couples come together and figuring out this is how we do it and this is our decision, becomes super healthy and strengthens the relationship.
Being able just to still create the space to form our own identity as a couple, create family, create our own family traditions that may often be a blend of the two, right? And as far as raising kids and all that, raising our kids, how we're going to discipline. There's so many they're big choices, obviously, but like you said, if we can't agree on the small things, maybe we need some outside support helping us to navigate, areas of communication skills and how we're gonna do that. And of course, that's what you do as a therapist, and I'm sure you see that, being able to help people with those resources and tools and life skills and all of that to help them.
Sure. I mean, the number one thing I think people call and say when they're coming in for therapy is that they want help communicating. And it's so interesting. And I was joking with someone else. I was like, I think we're actually better communicators than we give ourselves credit for. It's just harder when there's a deeper level of intimacy, right? Like we communicate really well with strangers because there's no risk and there's no vulnerability, right? We can say what we want and do a lot of things and, share or listen and, have fun and joke. But then when it comes to these very close and intimate relationships, it's like we just throw that all out the window and just get very defensive and guarded, because if I'm open and do that, there's a higher risk of being hurt and injured.
The cost. There is there's more of a potential risk to that in terms of how that's going to impact our relationship. But if we don't allow ourselves to go deep like that and vulnerable, and couples get stuck, I think.
And there's a direct correlation between the level of vulnerability and the level of intimacy. The reason why it is scarier to be intimate or be open with our partner is because there's a greater risk, but at the same time, there's a greater reward, right? The payback I get from my spouse when I open up to them and am honest and communicate with them is so much higher than a stranger, right? Like we could be like, oh, that was fun. I got to meet that guy, right? Like I remember I met Bill Murray once when I was in South Carolina. I was in a golf tournament. He was also in the golf tournament, right? And so literally it was before, and then I got to stand next to him and someone took my picture. Like that's my experience with Bill Murray. Like super cool, and fun, but there was no risk there.
Right.
And
surface level.
We were able to laugh and joke and, interact, and that was cool. And we had great interactions. I was like, hi, my name's, we were able to talk. And then so many times in relationships, we forget how to talk and we just go through basic problem solving, right? If the only time we talk is when there's a problem and when there's issues or, something's wrong, of course we're going to have communication problems because it's just negative.
Yeah.
And so like finding out how do we just talk? How do we build those positive interactions, right?
Right.
So important to balance that out.
And there's no substitute than carving out space for time together around that piece as well.
Absolutely.
As we wrapping up here, Austin, tell me what would be, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What's one piece of advice you'd give to your pre-married self?
Okay. One thing I've learned, and I actually did this better with my wife, my current wife, which is maybe why I have such a great wife, right? But and I actually had to wrestle through this when I was doing some youth work, because I had some teenage boys ask me, how do you know if someone's the one? Right? The infamous question, how do I know if this is the person that I should go out with or propose to or be engaged to? And I think what I came up with, and through prayer and through just my work with couples and God's word, is that there's 4 things that are really, really important to healthy relationships at the beginning, and they help minimize some of the conflicts that we can have. And it's a reversal of how we approach relationships. Like, most people base whether they want to be in a relationship with someone based off of attraction, right? Do I have a chemical, biological reaction to this person, right? Am I attracted to them? And that's important, but I don't think it's the number one thing. I think so often we allow that to be the thing that draws us into a relationship, but it won't be the thing that sustains us in it. And so we have to also look at, are there shared beliefs, common values, and compatible goals, right? Because if we have opposite beliefs, right, then we're creating an area of conflict where we either have to avoid that whole area of our life and spirituality, which shuts off a huge part of who a person is. And you can't just remove that from someone. It bleeds through every area. And so having beliefs and faith be aligned together is so important for a healthy relationship. And then values, what is important to you? What do you value as a person is very important, right? If you value a large family, then and your partner doesn't, right? That's going to create a conflict. If you value, whatever it is, if you're very compassionate and value community work and being involved in those type things, then and your partner doesn't, and they're more focused on just their work, then you're creating another tension and conflict in your relationship. And then, compatible goals. I think this is really important. And after our conversation with you and Eve, I think that's something you guys showed so well in that conversation we had a couple of weeks back on my podcast, was having these goals for our life that don't have to be the same, right? We don't have to be doing the same thing, but they're compatible.
Yeah.
Because what should happen is, I, as a husband, should be empowering my wife to achieve her dreams and her goals. Like, she should be better because of me, not feeling held back. And then her role as my spouse is to help support and empower me to fulfill the goals that God's given me. So together we're doing that. And I think Eve said it so well, is that those align when we're walking together in our life. And, they're complementing to each other. They don't take away from one person, but they actually empower each other to pursue those things. And then lastly is the attraction, where yes, you should want to be with your partner. You should be sexually attracted to your partner. Those are like things, but here's the reality. That's not a short list. Like, if we're really, really honest as people, there's countless numbers of people that you could go out at any point in time and find sexually attractive.
Right.
But there's not the same. The list gets a lot shorter when you add in, do we have compatible goals? Do we have, aligned values? Do we have, shared beliefs?
Yeah. And those are the 3 things, the top 3 you mentioned are the things that are going to really make or break a marriage. Right. Yeah. And I hear you talking about this: shared beliefs, common values, compatible goals. That's such a, it goes against, when you're as a young person, just thinking back and how I was attracted to my wife. I'm so glad we had some premarital counseling, because our pastor who did the counseling with us really forced us to ask some of these questions in these areas. And that was so helpful. Like, we didn't get it all figured out, pre-marriage, but we realized there are some at least some overlap in terms of these shared beliefs, values, and compatible goals. I don't think we're trying to clone each other here, like to say we're just we have to get 100%, right off the bat here, but there should be some overlap, to give us peace about moving into this relationship long term, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And here's the thing, we all grow and we change. Like our beliefs and our values are different through different stages of our life. And so if we can align at any point and stay aligned as a couple and grow together, that's so important. Like my beliefs are way different now than they were 10 years ago, right? Who I was at 25 is way different than who I am at 37, even within that context, and just a few years ago. So it's this growth. And the great thing about being in a marriage is that you have someone alongside you and you should be growing together through that relationship. And so if we're doing that, we have this benefit of being able to grow together in our beliefs, in our values, right? And being humble, right? We're called to be humble. And I think some of that is being able to not think that I have all the answers when it comes to my beliefs or my values. Like your partner is probably right as much or more than you are about whatever it is, whether it's a belief or a value, right? And so like being willing to defer to your partner and assume maybe that they're right is super healthy and helpful, I think, for our relationships.
Yeah. And just being willing to try new things and explore new things that maybe are outside of your existing values or goals, and that's what's really helped us too, just explore new things together. And then I think we talked about this again, like when we had our other conversation a couple of weeks ago, but just realize that there's some things that we're just going to say, and give each other permission to bow out sometimes. Hey, that's something that interests you, but not me. But we have these other common areas. We're going to spend time together. We're going to value time together in these areas. It's healthy to look at it and approach it from that perspective, I think, too.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, hey, Austin, this has been great. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I want our listeners to know how they can connect with you in terms of what you're doing, what content you're putting out there. How can our listeners connect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the easiest way to connect with me is going to be through my social media. If you actually wanted, it's just Homestead Family Therapy. If you're interested in what I do professionally there, and then homesteadfamilytherapy.com, or on Facebook and Instagram. I try and put out helpful, inspirational, and, tools and tips that couples can use to strengthen their relationships there regularly. So I put out videos and different, info and graphics to help with that for them. And then I'm just Austin N. Pritchard on Facebook and Instagram for my personal stuff. If you want to see, my two little girls and playing in the snow.
Very cool. Okay, so this is how they can connect with you, and I'll go ahead and put some links there in our show notes so our listeners can have a way to get that information as well. But again, Austin, thanks so much for being with me, and appreciate you. And we'll look forward to hopefully some more time together, conversations down the road here.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks so much for having me, Tim. You guys have a great day.
Shared beliefs, common values, compatible goals, and sexual attraction. These are all important things to consider when choosing a partner for life. Having sustainable, intimate relationships depends on giving attention to not just one, but all three of these areas. And pre-marriage is just the start. Post-marriage, there's still lots of growth that can be accomplished in all of these areas. So thank you, Austin Pritchard, for this reminder. Did you know that couples coaching is a thing? If you're a couple wanting to go deeper in this area of shared values and goals, or just feel a need for support as you dream and plan together, reach out to me at EncompassLifeCoaching.com to find out how working with a coach can be a great way to get on the same page and move forward together. That's a wrap for this episode of Navigate. I've been your host, Tim Austin. Come back and join me for another episode of Navigate real soon.